going to turn it over to our fantastic panelists to introduce yourselves.
Cool. Hi, everybody. My name is Dan Koplowitz. I run Friendly Fire Licensing. We're a sync agency here in Los Angeles. We work with about 50 different label and publishing catalogs from every continent in the world except for Antarctica. But if you know any talented penguins, send them my way. And our focus, we do work with, it's not that we don't work with American stuff, but our focus is largely working with artists from elsewhere in the world, because it's a world out there.
Hi everybody, I'm Michelle Johnson. I'm an independent music supervisor based here in Los Angeles. I work on a few different projects. I work on Cobra Kai for Netflix. I work on The Boys for Amazon with Yvette Metoyer. And I work on an upcoming Walking Dead world show called Dead City, which is going to be really fun. And a lot of other things. But I am really excited to be here.
Hey everyone, my name is Jody Friedman. I do a lot of different things, but I have a sync agency and I also music supervise, which I think maybe 15% of supervisors might do that. But I started as a sync agent and then I started supervising back in 2008. I've worked on some projects like the film Won't You Be My Neighbor and Ugly Delicious for Netflix. Right now I am helping out Joey Singer and I'm covering her shows for Liza Richardson and Gabe Hilfer. We've got 17 shows that we're doing music clearance for. So that's keeping me busy, and I'm happy to be here.
Alexandre?
Yes, hi everyone. So my name is Alexandre Mahout, and I'm a French music fan, very happy to be here. I started my music career in French radio, then I was A&R at Warner Music for a few years, and this is why I'm very happy to be amongst you guys and very honored because I ran the music department of a French movie studio called EuropaCorp for 12 years. And I was fortunate enough to produce and supervise a little bit more than 100 scores and sing for movies such as maybe the most known, maybe Lucy with Scarlett Johansson, whom you may know, or the Taken trilogy with Liam Neeson, or scores composed by Alexandre Desplat with Valerian and the City of the Thousand Planets, that kind of movie, or the Transporter series, you may know. And now it's been 3 years that I'm head of development and repertoire at SACEM, which is the French PRO. And I'm basically handling the relationship between us and our members, trying to enhance our services and to keep them as happy as possible. So once again, I'm very happy to be amongst such talented persons.
Amazing. So you guys all have such a diverse scope of projects, and Dan, I know you travel all around the world, bridging relationships with all of these different publishers and labels and artists. And Jody, you seem to have your hand in every aspect of this business, from HD Music Now to your clearance to being a music supervisor. And Michelle, you're working on so many diverse projects. Talk a little bit about your role and how you kind of facilitate, or how you're involved in the international clearance space.
I'll go first. I guess as a sync agent, I'm a seller, so of course we are finding artists and catalogs to represent. I fell into international licensing because we live in a big world and there's so much extraordinary music. It's nothing against music that's made here in Los Angeles or domestically, but that's covered pretty well. And I think in the year 2022, there's no reason why an artist sitting in their bedroom in Tallinn, Estonia, or in Cairo, or in Seoul can't get their music into something. And, with these different countries, you have various musical histories, and you can have a style of music and a genre that you might not find as well here in the States. But I learned pretty quickly that for very understandable reasons, American music supervisors and sync agents and publishers don't necessarily have the connections or the attachments to these other territories. Of course, if you're a music supervisor in North America, you need to know that the rights that you're getting are clear, are open, that everyone's crossing the T's, dotting the I's. There's no funny business. The people you're working with speak English, are able to communicate. And so, you have to know that you're licensing good music safely. So what I try to do is develop and build relationships, and this is where the travel comes in these other countries, so that we can have reliable partners. In countries where the licensing landscape might be different, a lot of countries where they don't necessarily see the value in sync or understand that it's a way that they can make money, or countries where they think that if you sync a song, the TV show now owns the song and you have to take it down from Spotify. So a big part of my job is correcting those misconceptions on both sides, while also with supervisors here in the States, kind of hopefully doing my best to open their eyes to the fact that there's some awesome music. And I don't, not just, pan flutes and bongos, but amazing music in a huge variety of styles being made all over the world that's very easy to license. So my goal there is, as the title of the panel says, to bridge that gap between those two worlds and help connect them in a way that's useful for everybody.
Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, whenever I work on a project, I'm lucky enough to work on a lot of diverse projects, and when they have music or characters from different parts of the world, or if the show is set in a different part of the world, I will immediately try and find music from that region. Authentic music, ideally from people that are making music right now. It depends on the time period I'm working in, but that's when I really reach out to my sync people like Dan and Jody that can help me find music that I can license quickly, that is already vetted, and because television, which I mostly work in, goes pretty fast. So, yeah. And that's I'm thrilled with so much international music that's available for us to work with. It's fantastic.
Jody?
Yeah, I second part of all of what Dan said, but there was one thing you said that really rang true with me, is that there's a plethora of music, American music out there. So finding other music that is unique and different excites me. So when I find something that I'm passionate about, I want to sign it. I want to represent it. So it becomes a creative discussion, a business discussion. I started a Latin record label, but I don't speak Spanish. So I have a partner who speaks Spanish and is really entrenched in that world because I grew up in Florida. I love Latin music, Cuban music, Puerto Rican music. And, it's same with K-pop. When K-pop started taking off, I got excited by it. I thought it was really cool and fun. So I started seeking out K-pop and producers who can produce K-pop. So, that's on the sync agent side. And on the supervision side, there's been projects where, one project in particular where we had to find some really obscure Turkish Anatolian funk music. And it's because the editor pulled it off YouTube. And, we're tasked with tracking down the owners, which is easier these days than it used to be, but it's still hard to get in touch with them. So you have to navigate some pretty treacherous waters there.
Alexandre?
Yeah, what struck me, just I think Dan said, one of his goals is to license good music, obviously, but safely. And this is interesting because we are talking about bridging the gap, obviously, between maybe two continents, but also between producers and music supervisors, directors and music supervisor. They don't have the same, they don't think about music the same way. And I remember, because I worked on an international project from Europe that was distributed in the US. The main difference was that, the European contract has 100 pages. A license contract in Europe, it has 100 pages because European people, they want to think about everything that could happen. In the US, it's much more pragmatic. You agree about the fee, you agree about the territories, you agree about the duration. Basically, a license contract can be like 2 or 3 pages maximum. And when I think about bridging the gap, one of the thing I made most was trying to inform doing some pedagogy, trying to teach how it works, because sometimes, my legal in Europe, he was afraid because he said, but this contract is too short, and so, bridging the gap, when you're trying to license from Europe a US song, or from the US an Italian song, it's also, the way you approach. Also, legally speaking, it's, that's what strikes me about what we just said.
Yeah, so you guys all kind of touched on challenges or roadblocks. Can you talk a little bit more about, those roadblocks, whether or not it's, language barrier or cultural barrier, or just simply a clearance issue, like you were not able to track down the right rights owners? Can you speak a little bit about that?
I mean, sure. One. I mean, there's usually several a year, but one that comes to mind is for the boys. An editor put a random Brazilian song, like a Brazilian funk hip hop song, in the cut, and it was really cool. And so we were trying to find it, Yvette and I, and we finally tracked it down to some person and then both of us set about trying to use Google Translate to communicate. And this guy was like, he just wasn't understanding really what we were trying to do. And he, his only response, I sent him a quote request. I asked Sony if we had quote requests in other languages. That would be a great thing, actually, but it does not exist. And so trying to translate a Sony quote request on Google Translate is not recommended. But, basically his response was send money now. And so, it was like, I wish I could do. So we had to eventually drop it, and then his manager became involved, who was also, you pay us first. And so like, we can't do this. And the time was running out and we just had to move on. So then we reached out to our licensing folks to get, authentic Brazilian music. That we could license.
Yeah, in that instance, it's so interesting because, you have somebody who might not be familiar with the business, and you're on a tight timeline, and you don't necessarily have the opportunity to explain to them, like, no, this is how it works. Like, this is how, you have to play by our rules. Yeah. In that instance, like, is there like an intermediary, or like what resources do you use that you can go to hopefully like explain the situation?
Well, in that case, it was clearly like a one-on-one situation. And there was, even though a manager got involved, it was not helping at all. The language barrier, the cultural barrier was still there. And it was really a bummer because I would have really loved to have given this person money. That can be a career changer for people. $3 grand, $4 grand, $5 grand, whatever. That's a lot of money for a song that you just, hey, here, I want to give you $6,000, out of the blue. So it was a bummer, but we could not feel that we were licensing something safely. And we couldn't get a signature. We couldn't get anything. So we were just like, okay, we have to move on.
I can touch on that as well a little bit. I think, as you say, there's no denying that there's a lot of challenges around international music. One which is unavoidable is time zones. The world is the shape that the world is. There's, daytime here is nighttime somewhere else, and vice versa. I always try, and I do this with American music as well. I think anytime you're pitching music, you try and signal to the supervisor ahead of time any potential bumps in the road or red flags. So I always tell people, we work with a lot of K-pop and a lot of Korean music in general. I say, we can get it cleared. It's going to take us longer. It just is. The process between multiple rights holders, time zone. If I write them an email at 10 a.m. here, that's the middle of the night for them. And even if they're really on top of things, they're going to write me back when they wake up. I'm going to be done with work myself. The number of times I've found myself on, Zoom calls at weird hours just to hurry up and get something done as part of it. I think another thing that we do, as you say, is we have sort of liaisons or intermediaries that I work with in various territories who know those worlds really, really well. And when I start to work with them, I have a long talk with them. And we really kind of do a deep dive into what we're going to need on our end, talking about the master clearance, talking about the publishing clearance, talking about samples, emphasizing the speed with which we need to do these things, swear words, all the things that apply here in the States as well, but there's maybe a little added level of education. What they bring to the table is they know their local markets in a way that I never can. I don't speak Japanese. I don't speak a word of Japanese, but we have an incredibly reliable partner in Japan who not only speaks Japanese, but he knows which labels are easy to work with and eager to do licensing, who's really old school, needs a lot of money, who's fast, who's slow, who's pleasant, who's an asshole, who has this type of music or that type of music. So I can go to him and tap into this incredible wealth of local knowledge that you don't have unless you spend 15 years living there. We have someone like that at other places. There's still things get lost in translation. We work with the Thai hip-hop label, and we needed clean Thai language hip-hop. And I asked him to send me a list of which of the tracks he'd sent me were lyrically clean. And there was one that he said, well, this one's not clean. But I looked at the translation, there was nothing that seemed bad. And I realized that it was, they used the informal version of you, like tu instead of vous. Which to him was like, that's a swear word. I said, okay, that's okay. You can use informal too. But in other places, we have the opposite issue, and they don't understand that some actual swear words really are bad. So having these conversations ahead of time with the suppliers means that by the time that we are in a conversation with the music supervisor, everything's kind of like primed and geared and ready to go in such a way that hopefully we can license it pretty fast, pretty smoothly, pretty quickly, because we've had all of those kind of procedural conversations ahead of time.
Yeah, and Jody, you mentioned you're doing clearance on 17 shows. I imagine that you have hit some roadblocks at some point. Can you speak on that?
Name names.
Yeah, there's been roadblocks. It's the same challenges that I think Dan and Michelle have touched on. Something that I was mulling over, this is not related to the clearance, but there was a project I was on, and this has to do with cultural challenges. There was a project on Netflix that it was called Ingress the Animation. And they brought a team of us in to Hollywoodize the soundtrack because Fuji TV had released a version, and it was composed by someone in Japan. And this composer, it was, in all due respect, it was very bland, generic kind of music. So they wanted to spice it up once Netflix picked it up. So it pissed off the Japanese team, yet everything we had to do, every song that we replaced, we had to run it by Fuji TV. So every email that was drafted to the production company there had to be drafted in a certain way to show respect and apology and to get them to understand, like, we don't mean any disrespect. This is, we're doing our job, what we've been hired to do, and what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And every time it was a big challenge. It would take about a week to get a response from them, and you're on the mixing stage and on a schedule. So it was a big challenge. So, and I've never been to Japan, but I understand, the culture is very different and respect is everything there. So they had immediately been disrespected by Netflix, or felt that way, because they brought in a whole new team to replace their music. So we were working against that from the get-go.
That's so interesting. I want to bring Alexandre into the conversation. With your role at SACEM, do you kind of serve as, an intermediary or somebody who can facilitate that process or the cultural exchange?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I was very disappointing to learn that Jody, don't speak Japanese. I'm very disappointed about that. I'm just kidding. Well, first of all, just as a reminder, I'm always happy to remind a little bit how SACEM works. But it's a French PRO. It's the first PRO in the world in terms of revenue. We did about $1.3 billion last year of author rights. and in terms of technology also, because we have many platforms we are dealing with. Obviously, knowing the fact that we represent about 200,000 members all across the globe, not only French, but American citizens, Brazilian. We have a lot of Brazilian citizens. We are talking about Brazilian projects. We are not, and when I arrived 3 years ago, given my previous experience, I noticed that we are not directly linked to Music Supervisor. However, and I'm not saying this just because I'm here with you today, but I do mean it. However, Music Supervisor are fundamental, an essential cog in the machine of sync, of music. You are between the producers and the composer, the producer and the right holder. So we had to find a way, to bond a little bit much. Because obviously you are also the people who find opportunities for composer, publishers, lyricists, when, you find opportunity for them, for their song to be broadcasted anywhere. So this is absolutely essential for us. So about sync, here's the thing. Our member give us mandate to collect the money anywhere, on any platform, on any radios. However, we do not quite recognize sync right, as we don't think it's ours to manage. So we let them handle the thing. However, we do have some tools, to services to make the sync domestic and internationally, easier. Obviously, our catalog is public. So you go to our website. If you want to find right holders, you can find it on our website. If you do not find it, we have a US representation here in Los Angeles, or we have French offices that can help you to make the liaison with the right holders. And we basically do it on the spot. We do not negotiate for them, as once again, we think it's their jobs to do so. Obviously they have their moral rights also. So we cannot, everyone knows we cannot decide for them, but we can do the liaison. And we decided a few years ago to have a US representation here in Los Angeles, because obviously music supervision in the States and in the West Coast is very dynamic. Just only one additional thought. Being supportive with sync and international sync and music supervision is also being able to make some revenue out of a sync. Obviously, there is the national fee, obviously, but we all know that if you have a sync in a huge TV show that is broadcasted a lot, it may represent some money for the right holders. And this is why, we fought a lot with a platform in particular to make, good deals so the right holder can have, some revenue. And we've just signed a deal with Netflix, for instance, and we have the best deal possible. We have the best deal in the world for our PRO. And now I can say this is just a ballpark. But for instance, if you have a sync in a TV show that is broadcasting in a regular TV channel and has some success, it would be the same revenue that a TV show that has some success in Netflix, for instance. So things are changing. I'm sure we will be talking about buyouts a little bit later on, so I won't go any further. But this is an area of tools we are trying to make at disposal of our friendly music supervisors.
I want to get into the subject of buyouts, because this is like a big thing that comes up a lot, especially now. And I know everybody has like very kind of volatile opinions on buyouts. So let's talk a little bit about that. What is a buyout, first of all? Define it to anyone who may not know, and what that means in terms of different territories. For example, France and European territories where buyouts are now illegal.
I mean, go, Alexandre, why don't you start with this one?
Go ahead, please. I'm sorry. I cannot see you, so but I
No, go. You're good. Go ahead.
Okay. I'll go first then. So yeah, there's a French saying, I don't know if it exists in the US, but that basically says, give the man something to eat today, he will survive today. And teach him how to hunt, and he will survive, and he will eat all his life. I don't know if you get it right. Basically, buyout, this is the same thing. And in Europe, generally speaking, we are very attached to that kind of stuff. And obviously, a few years ago, we've been warned by some of our composers and members that some platform, wanted to offer a buyout contract. And in 3 years ago, in 2019, there was a huge fight in the European court about that. And there was a new copyright law that was about to be voted. And fortunately, in my opinion, we won that battle. And now in Europe, wherever comes from the production company, Japan, the United States, Italy, Finland, wherever, if you are a European composer, you cannot sign anything but a contract that allows you to earn revenue given the broadcast and the distribution of the TV show or the movie you're working on. Meaning, basically, the buyout is illegal in Europe. And we work a lot on this with also with a composer named Joel Buckerman. I assume you know him. He created a website called Your Music, Your Future, explaining what it meant, because obviously I won't tell you, but a fee can be 15% of the revenue of a sync, and then you have a lot more revenue. So I have to say that we are very much attached to that, because we think that this is basically the life and the way of living of our members for decades, and that a buyout is not acceptable. I'm just sharing my opinion and French Pierre's opinion.
I mean, I'm an American, and I agree with you.
Okay.
I'm anti-buyout as well. I mean, I say this, by the way, as a sync agent who doesn't own or control publishing rights, so it's not, for me personally, from a very selfish perspective, it doesn't matter, but I want my artists to get paid. I do think, I mean, when you're talking about the sort of legalities of international licensing, I think it's important to understand that different countries do have different laws, have different rules. I often think of, I know, Alexandre, you said that SACEM doesn't negotiate the actual licenses on behalf of your writers. That's not necessarily true for every PRO in the world. I think, for example, about SPA in Portugal or VCPMC in Vietnam. And these are, SPA actually controls the publishing for a lot of Portuguese artists. And moreover, they have a rule that they won't, beyond buyouts, they won't license a track for perpetuity. So that's a real issue. If you want to use a track from a Portuguese artist that's published by SPA, they'll give it to you for 10 years or 20 years, but they're not going to give it to you for perpetuity. No big deal if you're doing an ad. Very much a big deal if you're doing a TV show that you want online for a long time. Especially because the studios, they have specific language that requires perpetuity. So how do you deal with that? This is the unstoppable force meets the immovable object. It's like, if neither side is going to budge, unfortunately, and I think in practice we see that there's not as much Portuguese music from Portugal in TV shows as there ought to be, and that's one of the reasons. There's other things around like public domain laws and things like that. One of the great examples that gets bandied about all the time is Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the 2001 A Space Odyssey thing. I feel like every Facebook sync group I'm on has this conversation about once every 3 months of what's the deal with this song? Is it public domain or not? Well, it is in most of the world, but it's not in Colombia, and it's not in, I think maybe France. There's a couple countries where it's not. So understanding, if you're licensing international music, if we have someone in another country that says, yeah, it's public domain, cool, great, that's a start. We often need to prove and establish that, in fact, it's public domain worldwide. So I think having if you're doing licensing across global borders, having an understanding of this sort of legal framework of the country from which you're licensing is critically important.
I try to encourage my writers they have no idea what they're doing. They don't know what a PRO is, but they're in a foreign territory. I try to encourage them to sign up with BMI Worldwide to be their administrator, just so they can do the deals and do the sync deals. But I want to touch on two things, because I think it's important to understand what a buyout is, and it's a direct license. And in the US, if you're a member of ASCAP, BMI, or CSAC, you have a non-exclusive relationship with your PRO. So that means that you can directly license your public performance royalties to a client. I educated myself on this back in 2006 when I was just getting into this business. And the first deal I was ever offered was with CNN. It was for a theme song. And they wanted a direct license. And I knew enough about it to say no. And I'm glad I did, because it paid about $30,000 in royalties. Another example on the flip side of it, I was doing music clearance for Maggie Phillips on a show called Strangers on Facebook Watch. This was in 2017. At first, everyone was getting, there were 8 episodes or 12 episodes, and everyone was getting MFN. So $1,500 to everybody across the board. Most favored nations. Across the board, everyone gets paid the same. I think Facebook came back and said, we want to do a direct license. So we had to replace everybody who was not with a US PRO. But we said to them, that's fine, but we want to triple, because we're serving our client. My job is to clear the music and get them what they want so they don't fire me. We want to triple the offer. So instead of $1,500 for everybody, everyone got $4,500. Would they have ever seen that money from Facebook Watch in performance income? I think it would take many, many years. So that was how I justified it. That's how we justified it as a team. And everybody who did the deal got, $4,500 across the board. So you have to understand what it is, and every situation calls for a unique response. A majority of the time, I'd say no to a buyout. But in that situation, you might want to consider saying yes if you're a U.S. writer. If you're not a U.S. writer, as Alexandre said, it's illegal, so you can't do it.
Michelle, what about you? Have you worked on shows that required buyout language and the approvals, or, how about you?
Not required, but it's virtually on every studio quote request that goes out. It's not required that anyone signs it, and I have noticed as of late, really no one opts in on it. And there's luckily no pushback. I was very afraid that studios were going to push back. And a few years ago somewhere, they were trying to urge us to go back and see if we could get a quote on that, and I politely found a way out of that, because I want people to get paid their royalties,
Yeah, I think that the analogy that Alexandra mentioned earlier is a really good one. If you're, teaching somebody how to hunt, they can continue to earn income, feed themselves, generate money for the rest of their career, rather than just, a direct license that you can't see whether or not that's going to generate any money in the future. I wanted to touch on a point that you mentioned earlier about, working with that Japanese composer and, the kind of like cultural offense that might have happened. Like, did that shut down communication? Like, were you able to kind of, work around that? Or was it a situation where you just had to kind of drop it and move on?
We had to, I didn't write the letters, the producer wrote the emails, and we had to space out communication because they wouldn't respond. So we had to wait, 5-7 days to write again, and we tried to approach it from a different angle. Eventually, they responded, and we got what we needed to get. So, it just was a process. It took a lot longer than it normally would take. Yeah.
And Michelle and Dan, have you encountered an instance like this where there was like some sort of cultural breach that occurred, and how did you go around it?
All the time. It's a big world. The business cultures, the music industry landscapes are very different in different places. As I mentioned at the beginning, there are countries in which sync is really not a thing. It's really not. To use Japan as an example, it was not that long ago that if you wanted your song in an advertisement in Japan, you paid them, which is crazy to me. It's like, because it's an advertisement for your song. Now they pay you, but it's not, the money that you're going to get for a car commercial in the US versus in France versus in Japan. These are very different things. I've had situations where an artist, they're open to licensing their song, but they won't send you a WAV file or an instrumental until they've received payment for the use. Well, that's challenging when you're in a landscape with, we're licensing a song, you're not going to get paid until it could be, 2, 3, 5 months after the show is aired. So that's a sticky wicket of how do you get all the materials together? How do you get approval without money in their hands and navigating these things? And I think it's an issue of, I kind of keep returning to this, but it's an issue of education. And the education goes both ways. Making sure that on the one hand, the artists and the rights holders understand how licensing works here and the needs and the process of a quote request and a long form license and what the schedule is for payment and the materials that they need ahead of time and so on. But it goes the other way as well, making sure that supervisors here understand that it's a little more of an ask when you're licensing music from other territories, and they sometimes need reassurances, and sometimes we need people as much as possible to meet in the middle and understand how this stuff works. I think most of these things can be solved through consistent dialogue, which I was maybe not the most actionable piece of advice, but it is true. I mean, having these conversations, really having these face-to-face meetings helps you deal with things, because when someone's halfway across the world and you haven't broken bread with them or spoken to them or looked in their eyes, they're going to be they're just not going to be they're not going to trust you as much. I think as much as possible, if you can build these relationships and develop a certain degree of trust, then when I tell them, don't worry, your song is licensed, the money is coming, but it's going to be a while, and they'll understand.
It's especially true with, think of television shows these days, our production schedule is a year, so we're requesting a song, we know it, we have to clear it because we want to be able to use it, but those people won't see any money for a year probably, and that's a big ask for a lot of people, and nobody really understands also, because it's hurry up, sign this quote request, and then you're like, okay, thank you, we'll be back, and then you just ghost them for months, and even once the show airs, they're still waiting. So I understand people's frustration for sure. But that's where working with great sync agents that can communicate that, unfortunately, it is a lot of hurry up and wait sometimes too. But those are also, I'm sure that it's offensive. It's offensive to me. So, yeah.
One small thing I might add is it's also worth, I love it when U.S. supervisors are open to using international music. It's amazing. It's fantastic. I encourage it. I think everyone wins. There's situations, and I don't say this, I don't claim to be the world's leading expert. There's plenty of scenes and areas that I have learning to do. But when a supervisor comes and tries to offer really low music for something, because, it's whatever, it's from some other country, we got 1,000. And I have to go to them and say, well, actually, this artist is massive in their home. We had this with a Jordanian artist, and we were offered sort of a really offensively low amount of money. This artist is huge. They're on TV. They have millions of views on YouTube. And so it's our job, without getting greedy or anything like that, to convey this artist may be new to you, but this is a huge artist in their home territory and their language. And so conveying that in both ways. And we can say, well, if you want an indie artist, we have an indie artist who's unknown even in their home country, but this person's a big deal, and you need to understand that, the price tag attached to it is going to have to be commensurate with that.
It wasn't me. I didn't do that.
Michelle's always great.
It was me.
Yeah, if I may add, this is what have been said is very interesting also, because music supervisors are very often, their role is also to inform very much, because very often music supervisor suffers from the misconception of a sync in both ways. Sometimes the fee is outrageously low, and obviously, as you said, you're trying not to be too greedy. And also, sometimes when you deal with people who are not well informed of what the world of sync, how it works really, when they receive a phone call from the US, they think they just won to the lottery. Even if their song is used 8 seconds on a mid-budget TV show, they want to ask $200,000 because, they just hear the word sync. And this is where it gets tricky, because it's always a matter, as the panel says, of cultural gap. and you have to, to point out that maybe like you have 50 things to do on this show, and you just cannot afford that, and this is not how the market works. I mean, at least I've been, and I remember this story. But sometimes also, they take advantage of that. I was working from the United States for a few years with Relativity. We had a joint venture with EuropaCorp, and I wanted to sing a song, and the paperwork were fine. It was a song based in Europe. The ownership was in Europe, and at the last minute, obviously, it was a known publisher who knew that we needed perpetuity, etc. And at last minute, he said, "Oh, I thought you wanted 20 years. If it's perpetuity, the fee is going to be doubled." But it was a way to to leverage that perpetuity thing, because it's in the States or Anglo-Saxon world, perpetuity is adamant, but in Europe, it's basically more 30 years or something like that. So it's always a matter of understanding each other on a very versatile basis.
Yeah, I think that one thing that came up earlier, which is so important, is trust. And you mentioned it. And trust is such an important thing, not only for, your relationships with the artists, but also for supervisors. Like, I know that I can go to you. I know that you're going to give me the information that I need. Another really kind of challenging thing is timelines. I don't know if you guys have, worked on productions, for example, that take place in Italy during the summer. Because I know that I worked on a project that took something like, that people were on vacation for like 3 or 4 months of the year. And the response was very slow, and trying to, convey that we're on an extremely tight deadline. Talk a little bit about this if you can.
Scandinavia is out of the office. July and August don't even. But I mean, honestly, I pitch less Swedish and Danish music during the summer.
Germany too.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, frankly, it's healthy. I'm jealous of them. Yeah, Italy. Yeah, I mean, and so these are issues. I remember an issue once. I had a label in Sweden. This older guy, and he said, here's my number. Do not get me out of bed if it's under $20,000. I need my beauty sleep. And we got a really, really urgent request for an Ethiopian Finnish folk singer for $15,000. And I was like, do I call him? Because this is like, he's yelled at me before. I did. I texted him. I was like, if you're awake, could you get back to me? And like nothing. I did end up calling him. I mean, normally in these cases we have, we talk with the label and we have a number if something's really urgent. But yeah, there's issues. I've had supervisors here reach out to me. It's a really, really urgent pull for music from a certain country, and it's a national holiday in that country, and no one's home. So, I mean, if you're doing a production that's set in Italy, go take a look at the calendar and see what days are holidays in Italy. Remember that not everyone has the exact same kind of work days and work schedules. As much as possible, we try and find, like I mentioned that we have a partner in Japan who's great. One of the reasons that I love him is that he has horrible insomnia, and he's up. I can talk to him. I mean, it's 4 a.m. I hit him up. He's like, "Yeah, I'm awake." But these are challenges that you have to deal with. So, and of course, there's needs that are on our end and on the supervisor's end that are sort of non-negotiable. But as much as possible, if you're going to do something international, like build in a little bit of cushion, build in a little bit of flexibility there, understanding that with the time zone, the language, the cultural differences, the business differences, all of those things, it's just, even if people are really on top of it, it's just going to take a minute. It's just how it goes.
Also, if I may add, the market rate, you can also, the market rates can be a little bit different. I remember, dealing this major thing for a trailer for a Beatles song for the movie Valerian and the City of the Thousand Planets. It was a 7-figure deal, so it was a huge deal. And we managed to have a better deal through the French headquarters rather than the US the US sync agent because you know the in the US obviously it was the same condition, the same territories, but in the US obviously the market is more dynamic and they would dare a little bit more, whereas in France that kind of deal doesn't, a 7-figure deal, it doesn't happen every day. But maybe for Dan and Michel, I'm of course, but unfortunately, and so we managed to get a better deal, getting through the European headquarters. So in terms of cultural habits, it was a pretty shocking.
Jody and Michelle, did you want to add anything to this? No. All right. I want to open it up to any audience questions. All right. Right here.
Hi, I have a question for Dan. It's a two-part question, if that's okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, how did you go about educating yourself about the nuances in different countries and finding partners in those countries? And the second part is, do you have a system to organize that information once you learn it for future reference?
I mean, yeah, I imagine in some ways it's probably the same as the other people here. I mean, as going around and meeting people. I mean, I speak at a lot of conferences internationally. I ran a label myself and mostly put out non-American bands. I had a lot of artists from Scandinavia. I had like a Japanese-American shoegaze band. And I pretty quickly realized that it was this sort of unfilled gap in the industry here. Not to suggest for a moment that I'm the only person doing this. I'm not. And there's so many other fantastic catalogs, fantastic sync agents with really strong international connections. But I think sitting down, going places and meeting people, and you have false starts. I meet people and they might sound great, and then I discover that, their label is fully owned by Warner. Well, that I can't really work with them in that case. No hard feelings. Or their expectations are really just don't align with my own. But I think going around, meeting people, having an open mind, listening to weird radio stations, doing that weird digging. My favorite thing is just going down a weird rabbit hole of old Turkish psych rock or whatever, and just discovering strange stuff. And if I like it, I look it up. I'll search it out. I'll mention I also have cultivated relationships, and this is something that I encourage anyone interested in working with international music to do with music export offices. A lot of countries have offices that are really geared towards exporting their music abroad. And this goes beyond
government offices.
In some cases, they're government offices. Yeah, in some cases, they're government sponsored. In other cases, they're private. It sort of depends on a country by country basis. And it's not just for sync. I mean, they do stuff with touring and publicity and videos and grants and things like that. But they can really be your friends because their job is to talk about their music. So you can go to the Austrian Music Export Office and be like, what's good? What are you excited about? I'm looking for this or that. And that's something not enough people, I think, utilize that as a resource. These people will be happy to hear from you, knowledgeable about their local scenes, and I think they're an incredible resource.
2 plugs. The Production Music Conference is a great place to meet and network with sub-publishers around the world. It just happened last week, so it'll happen again in September. And the second plug, I have a course called World Tour where I interviewed all my sub-publishers, and we talk about the state of licensing in that territory. It's at licenseyourmusic.com. That is all.
Okay, right here.
Great question. It's a great question. For me, no. I mean, the budget is given in U.S. dollars, and no. But I think that it can backfire where, it may be $1,000 to you, but for us, it's, $750 or $500. So
Yeah, we work with our budgets that we have, and based on the scene that you're looking for music for, that's what sort of sets the budget.
Yeah, I think it's really important that an artist from anywhere in the world get paid an equally good rate. And I always fight against anyone. Oh, they're from a country in the developing world. They'll, give them a couple bucks. They'll be happy. That fills me with rage. There's situations where when you're licensing into another country, we license stuff like in Brazil or in Chile or places like that, where due to various tax things that are too boring to get into now, $1,000 license, they send you 500, and it's just, there's certain legal and financial things that you can't get around. But no, I believe good music deserves to be paid for in a way that I think is consistent with music from anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, you can try to put into the contract or in the quote payable in US dollars. Although right now that might backfire on you if it's in Europe.
All right, right back here.
When you say not much of a pull, what do you mean?
Well, let's say you're new to the business and it's maybe your first or second deal and the terms and conditions are really not in favor for you. What can you do to kind of get a better deal?
Educate yourself as much as you can. Read books, take courses, surround yourself with people who do know the business that can help you. Find communities that you could be a part of, like this one. The people you meet here that have been doing it for longer, and just call them up. Hey, I've been offered this deal. Are these equitable terms? Are these fair terms? Usually they are. I think a lot of times when you're not educated, you kind of get scared and you see this contract, like, what does this mean? It doesn't seem fair, but usually they are. So I think when you come from a place of fear instead of knowledge, then it can backfire on you. So make sure that you educate yourself as much as you can.
Michelle and Alexandre, did you want to touch on this topic at all?
No, I think Jody did a great job.
Yeah. I mean, just being here and, watching the panels, educating yourself, like Jody said. Also, the Guild of Music Supervisors has a ton of panels up on YouTube that you can watch. That is a ton of information, a lot of good resources there. Any other questions? Right back here.
Intermediaries.com. No. It's I don't mean to be glib.
Better get on that.
I mean, these are people who they don't work for Friendly Fire Licensing. They absolutely do their own thing, so I don't hog them. But I will say these are people I've sort of gone out and really built and nurtured relationships with in such a way that we have a partnership. But suffice to say, there's more than one person in Japan, in Germany, in wherever that is entirely capable of doing this. So I think it's about finding a partner who aligns with your values, who understands how licensing works here, who understands their local scene, has those connections, and is kind of willing to be your eyes and ears on the ground. Mine are, it's not a secret. Like I can name them, but it's there's kind of people that we've worked with very closely. Over the course of years, because we need to prove ourselves to them. as well. I need to demonstrate that we're getting licenses for them, that we're getting good fees, that we're paying on time, that we're not misrepresenting anything. It would be very easy if we got lazy or sloppy for us to destroy the relationship on our end. So I try to avoid that.
We probably have a little bit of time left for one or two more questions. So right back here.
All the licensing I do is for worldwide.
Advertising is different. That it's worth mentioning. Advertising can be more territory specific, and obviously the fees that you get depend on the territory. You know, doing something in Belize is different from doing something in China, is different from doing something in the United States. But for TV and film, it's
Independent films.
Yeah.
Some independent films that are just going to film festivals, they might be North America only.
Okay, right here.
I'm not sure because in the audience it's quite hard to hear the question, but I think I heard when is it the right time to register to a PRO as a composer? Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
In other countries.
Well, it's as soon as possible, if I may say. You know, once again, in any PRO, I'm talking, I work at SACEM, so I would say, please register at SACEM. This is the best, because I'm French and I'm not very modest as a Frenchman. But no, on a serious note, when you register to a PRO, you do not give anything to them. You just give them the mandate, the right, the temporary right to represent your right and to collect the money. So you're not selling anything. You still are the owner of your composition, or you still are the owner of the publishing part. You're just saying, well, it would be more convenient for 200,000 members to negotiate with Netflix rather than if I do it individually. I would get a better rate. It's just like, I always use this image. It's just like, you know, where you work in the field and you grow potatoes. And if you want to sell them to a distributor, you know, well, you won't get a good price because you're the only producers, you know. And then you decide to gather. We call this in France cooperative. I don't know if it's the same word in English. You know, so you are basically 1,000 producers of potatoes, and then you go to the distributor, to the supermarket, and you say, okay, you deal with one. You do not deal just with me. You deal with 1,000 potato producers. So maybe you will get a better rate for us. The PRO, it seems, maybe my analogy is just on the spot. I'm sorry, I'm improvising here. But the PRO is just like that. We are stronger together. This is exactly it. And when we were talking about buyout a little bit earlier, it's a little bit that I'm very optimistic about what we just said, because, for instance, it's a matter of demand and offer. For instance, on video games, it's very hard to get something else than a buyout. So at SACEM, we refused any kind of deal that is something with buyout. And now it's been a few years that some video games studio come to us and say, okay, we really want this composer that is represented by SACEM. Since we really want him, we will accept to do something else at a buyout. When it comes to buyouts, it's very important that we stick together, French, Italian, American, because once there's a breach in the system, everyone, you know, I really believe that content is king. And this is what we manage here. This is content. Distribution is important, of course. It is mandatory. It's a partnership we have with distributor. But what's in the pipes? It's you guys music supervisors, you guys composers, you guys publisher that helps this to happen and to exist. I'm sorry I got carried away.
Well, on that note, it looks like we're out of time. So thank you all for coming. Thank you to all the amazing panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.